The pricing structure, although the motion, as you said, was relatively simple, there's a lot of background work that has gone into this and a lot of work that needs to go on further. What we've done is rebalance water and sewage so that for most domestic customers they won't be any worse off. But then we can go forward for the next 5 years, so your water, sewage and electricity prices will only ever go up by the rate of inflation, and we've pegged that at Manx CPI. What we do need to do, though, is do some detailed work on industrial customers, businesses, industries, to see how the reduction in the discount that they currently get will affect them. And that bit of work is ongoing and has to be done in conjunction with those businesses, but also the Chamber of Commerce, the Municipal Association, a whole lot of other stakeholders, to make sure that we do get the fair system that we're planning to implement.
You say most domestic customers won't lose out. That infers that some will. Do you know how many?
No domestic customers will lose out by the changes. Those people who currently have septic tanks will benefit to some degree because the sewage charges are going up and the water rates are going down. Because if they don't have to pay any sewage charges, then theoretically they'll benefit from the lower water rates. But no domestic customers should be worse off at all.
Your colleague, Laurie Hooper, your colleague in Ramsey, talked about the system being unfair in terms of the rating system and how this all applies and how it worked. And this is the domestic rating system, local authorities. Can you explain to us what he means by that?
Yes, certainly. My colleague in Ramsey has looked at the rating system, and I think all of us agree that it's long overdue for revision. What we have at the moment is a rating system based on rental values in the 1970s, and we're applying that to houses built this week. I mean, it is ludicrous. So Minister Thomas in Tynwald pledged to review the whole rating system, and that's an ongoing exercise going on at the moment. My colleague in Ramsey has pointed out that a lot of people in Ramsey are paying substantially higher rates than those people who might be just down the road in the countryside. And what he was asking Tynwald to approve was that Manx Utilities weighted our charges to take account of that. I personally, whilst agreeing with his intentions, in terms of getting a fairer rate system for all the people of this island, had real problems with Manx Utilities doing it ad hoc. I don't like the idea of that responsibility being given to us without accountability, and I think it's far better to have a proper ratings review, which is underway, rather than us try to preempt that by arbitrarily changing our prices between town and country.
That cross-subsidisation of domestic rates, as he calls it, though, it is unfair, and like you said, there is work being done. But I imagine that's little comfort for people that are still struggling with this at the moment.
Struggling with this in the moment, and have struggled with this, for decades, really. And I think as bills go up, those disparities become even more obvious. One of the other bits of work that Minister Thomas has pledged to look at are commercial rates, because we know that certain local authorities who have large commercial enterprises perhaps use commercial rates to subsidise domestic rates and keep those artificially low. Is that right? And I think some of these concepts need to be explored in a bit more detail and then brought in a fair way right across the island. Manx Utilities are really keen on working with the Cabinet Office to bring forward rates reform, and we'll piggyback onto that and use the best way we can for charging our customers. But I think, again, it's horse before the cart. I think that has to be led by central government, by the Cabinet Office, rather than by Manx Utilities at this time.
You spoke about how the rises over the next 5 years will be pegged to the consumer price index, not the retail price index. CPI is the lower one, and it's the one that usually is used for things like people's wages. In the past, government has used RPI to establish rises, and that's been very, very unpopular. So was that taken on board? Because that was unfair, wasn't it?
The CPI and RPI debate is very interesting because they used to be fairly similar, and then we started seeing them getting wider and wider apart. And you're quite right. In the past, a lot of the prices the government have charged have been in RPI, and yet the wages that they were given have been based in CPI. What the Cabinet Office has done is try across the board to standardise the rate of inflation as CPI. It's a better index, I think. And if we look at the Manx CPI that was announced on Monday, is 2.4%. That probably resonates with most people's experience of the way prices have gone up. Whereas CPI at the moment RPI at the moment is much higher.
I think they just often want consistency. That's the thing. They don't want to feel like they're being cheated or missing out.
Exactly. People want that honesty. They don't want people to be messing around with figures, picking the higher one when it suits them and the lower one when it suits them next time. And we've said that our prices will go up with CPI calculated on the island, not calculated in the UK.
Something else I just wanted to raise with you whilst you're here, and it kind of ties in with everything, because obviously the motivation for this is the debt of Manx Utilities. Now, how does that square, trying to remove that debt with trying to become more environmentally friendly? I mean, again, this is something that was raised within the debate, because surely, and I know an example of this in my head, and I will use it if necessary, but how can we square being environmentally friendly and greatly reducing our energy consumption, particularly electricity, with continuing to pay off that debt? The two of them don't square with each other, do they?
That's a very good question. When you think about it in abstract forms, they don't. But when you look at the reality, we can merge them together. And one of the things from the debate on Tuesday was a more strategic vision of energy use on the island. Completely agree with you that we need to conserve our natural resources. We need to be more energy efficient. And that will come into things like planning for new houses, that they're more energy efficient, they're insulated, the passive house projects that have been going on the island. From a purely selfish point of Manx Utilities, if I can get everyone to drive electric cars, if I can get everyone to heat their homes through electricity rather than coal or oil, then number one, we're going to be producing more electricity to meet that demand. Number two, we'll have less carbon emissions as well. What we're looking for from now until the 2030s is a transitionary period whereby we increase electricity demand, we get people using electric cars, electric space heating, but then we transition how we produce that electricity away from gas to renewables. And so that transition of getting people away from carbon-based forms purely onto electricity and then supplying that electricity in a more environmentally friendly way, we will, I'm almost certain, reach those targets by 2050 and hopefully long before that.
Because the example that I know of, and I don't need to comment specifically on this because I know that's fair, but just to give you an idea of the sort of, I suppose, battle that there is, I know of a company that a few years ago approached the government, particularly with regards to the hospital, and offered to do a survey and show ways that the hospital could save massive amounts of money on its electricity bills. And what ultimately put the kibosh on this was someone saying, well, no, I'm afraid the Manx Utilities Authority won't allow us to save massive amounts of electricity in the hospital because it will lose them massive amounts of money.
Yeah. What I'd say is that was then, this is now. What Manx Utilities is doing is, for instance, working with local authorities.
That was only about 2 or 3 years ago as well.
Okay. I apologise for that because that doesn't make sense for the country. What Manx Utilities are doing now, for instance, is working with local authorities to replace streetlights with LED. Counterintuitively, yes, that's less power, but we know it's the right thing to do. What we've also been doing with DEFRA is I'm trying to look at those low-income households and give them LED bulbs so we can reduce their energy bills and hopefully get them out of fuel poverty. So I think we have to deal with it responsibly, because for me as a chair of Manx Utilities, yes, I want the company to do well, but not at the expense of consumers. So it's working with those consumers, whether they be industry or people in their households, to keep their prices as low as possible, increase their energy efficiency. If we can grow the economy, if we can get more industry over here using electricity, and if we can switch people to electric vehicles and electric heating, that will tick all the boxes for me, as well as saving the environment.